Representative Jasmine Crockett turned a routine Senate. The accusation, sharp and stunningly direct, sliced through the typically staid proceedings of the United States Senate. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. On X, formerly Twitter, the video exploded without context, just the raw power of the confrontation. Hashtag Germanus and hashtag Crockett-Graham Showdown began trending nationally. On cable news, producers scrambled, bumping planned segments to air the footage on a loop. Pundits, caught flat-footed, struggled to frame the narrative. Was it a courageous act of constituent service or an unforgivable breach of decorum? It didn't matter. The image was the story. A black congresswoman from Texas, a guest in the Senate's hallowed halls, standing her ground against a powerful white committee chairman. Speaking not of abstract legal theory, but of a tangible, life-altering threat to one of her people. The internet had its verdict long before the political establishment did. This wasn't just politics. It was a fight, and everyone was choosing a side. 48 hours earlier, Senator Lindsey Graham was in his element. He sat in his spacious office in the Russell Senate office building, a room adorned with military memorabilia and photos of him with presidents past. Radiating the easy confidence of a man who had walked these halls for decades, his legislative director, a crisp young man named Thomas with an impeccable Georgetown pedigree, was running through the prep book for the upcoming judiciary hearing. The nominee, Judge Alistair Finch, is solid, Thomas said, tapping a pen. On his notes, he'll face the standard questions on precedent from the minority, but he's been prepped. Finch is fine. He's a good man. He'll be a fine judge. What I want to talk about is the victory lap. He leaned forward, a distinct glint in his eye. The PSPSA was Graham's signature. Legislative achievement of the last session, framed as a way to stop predatory lawsuits against healthcare providers. The bill had created a new federal framework that severely limited the venues and conditions under which a patient could sue a hospital for billing disputes, especially across state lines. It championed mandatory arbitration and set high financial thresholds for initiating litigation, effectively shielding large hospital conglomerates from the nuisance of individual lawsuits over exorbitant bills. It had been hailed as a triumph of tort reform by the Chamber of Commerce and hospital lobbying groups. It's already having a positive effect, Senator Thomas affirmed, flipping to a prepared page of talking points. The Healthcare Alliance of South Carolina reported a 30% drop in pending litigation. They're calling it a model for the nation. See, that's what we're here for, Graham said, settling back in his leather chair, protecting our institutions. These hospitals are pillars of our communities. They employ thousands. We can't have them bled dry by every person who doesn't want to pay their bills. That's what the Democrats don't get. They see everything. As a sob story, they don't see the bigger economic picture. He paused, a wry smile playing on his lips. Yes, sir. Representative Jasmine Crockett from Texas. She's scheduled to give 5 minutes of testimony on the judicial backlog's effect on federal civil cases, a courtesy invitation. Graham chuckled. A courtesy? Well, I'm sure she'll be courteous. Probably give us some lecture about the little guy. It's all they have. Theatrics. Let her have her 5 minutes. He was thinking about Judge Finch, about cementing, another conservative on the bench, about the long game. The PSPSA was part of that game, a structural reinforcement of the system he believed in. A few disgruntled individuals were just the cost of doing business, the acceptable collateral damage, as he'd once remarked to a donor, in the service of a greater economic good. The hearing would be routine. He was sure of it. The Capitol complex. In a cramped and perpetually cluttered office in the Longworth House office building, she wasn't looking at the grandeur of the Capitol. She was staring into the face of a woman who was on the verge of losing everything. The woman's name was Maria Sanchez. She was a 42-year-old single mother and a third-grade teacher. From Dallas, Texas, from the heart of Crockett's district. From another state. Crockett listened, her pen still, her focus absolute. Her chief of staff, a seasoned political operative named Alina, of constituent emails, a single mother facing foreclosure over a medical bill. It was tragic, but not uncommon. Then they saw the details. Maria recounted the story, her voice catching. A family road trip last summer to visit her sister in North Carolina. A horrific multi-car pileup on I-95 just inside the South Carolina border. Her son had escaped with minor injuries, but Maria's leg was crushed. She was airlifted to the nearest trauma center, a state-of-the-art facility in Charleston run by a massive private entity, the Palmetto Health Group. She'd had 2 emergency surgeries. She had been grateful, praising the doctors and nurses. Then the bill came. It was over $300,000. Her Texas-based insurance covered a fraction of the out-of-network costs. The remaining balance was staggering, impossible. I tried to set up a payment plan, Maria explained, tears welling in her eyes. I sent them what I could, $100 a month. It was a notice of a lien placed on her modest Dallas home, filed by a collections firm based in Columbia, South Carolina. The home she had inherited from her parents, the only real asset she had in the world. Crockett's mind, honed by years, as a public defender, began connecting dots. Maria, she asked gently, did you try to get a lawyer in Texas to fight this? Maria nodded, wiping a tear away. I did. He said there was nothing he could do. He said some new federal law made it so I had to go through their arbitration process in South Carolina, and that challenging the bill itself was almost impossible. He said it would cost me more to fight it than I could ever hope to save. David, the young aide, spoke up softly. That's the PSPSA Congresswoman. Graham's bill. It passed 9 months ago. This is the first case we've seen of it being used against one of our own constituents from out of state. Crockett felt a cold knot of anger tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just a billing dispute. It was a jurisdictional trap, a legal architecture designed to strip people like Maria of any home field advantage, forcing them into a hostile system controlled by the very entity suing them. It was, in effect, a legislative weapon. Get me everything you can on the Palmetto Health Group, Crockett commanded, her voice low and steady, and get me their campaign finance filings. I want to know who they give their money to. It took David less than an hour. The Palmetto Health Group was one of the largest healthcare providers in the Southeast, and their political action committee had been a significant donor in the last election cycle. One of the largest recipients of their generosity was the senior senator from South Carolina, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lindsey Graham. There it was. The whole sordid picture. A senator passes a law that benefits his donors. Those donors then use that law to go after a citizen in another state, a citizen with no power and no recourse, a citizen from her district. Alina, the chief of staff, saw the look on Crockett's face. Jasmine, your testimony at Judiciary is tomorrow. It's about judicial backlogs. It's a courtesy, a chance to build some bridges in the Senate. Bridges, Crockett said, the word sounding foreign and absurd. They're using a law to try and make a teacher homeless, and I'm supposed to go over there and talk about building bridges. She looked back at Maria Sanchez's terrified face on the screen. In that moment, Maria wasn't just a constituent. She was every client Crockett had ever represented who had been crushed by a system designed to work against them. She was the reason Crockett had gone to law school, the reason she'd become a public defender, the reason she had run for office in the first place. Alina. Cancel my morning meetings tomorrow, Crockett said, her decision crystallizing. David, I need you to print out 2 things for me. A copy of Maria's hospital bill and this lien notice, and I want the FEC report showing the donations from Palmetto Health's PAC to Senator Graham's campaign. Laminate them. Eyes widened. Jasmine, you can't. It's a Senate hearing. He's the chairman. He'll gavel you down. They'll say you're grandstanding, that you broke decorum. Let them, Crockett replied, her voice filled with a cold, clear resolve. Decorum didn't stop them from putting a lien on Maria's house. Decorum isn't going to get it removed. They want to talk about the justice system. Fine, let's talk about justice. She leaned closer to her webcam, speaking directly to Maria. Maria, I am so sorry this is happening to you. I can't promise you a specific outcome, but I can promise you this. They are going to hear your story. You are not invisible. That night, Crockett didn't sleep. She stayed up, going over the PSPSA line by line, mapping out the legal and political architecture of the trap that had ensnared her constituent. She wasn't just preparing for a hearing. She was preparing for a trial. The defendant was a piece of legislation. The prosecutor was her. And the courtroom was the Senate Judiciary Committee. Whether its chairman knew it or not, the day of the hearing, Jasmine Crockett walked into the Hart Senate office building with a calm, deliberate gait. She carried a simple leather portfolio, its contents known only to her and her staff. She nodded politely to the Capitol police officers, to the aides rushing past. To the reporters loitering in the hallway, their attention currently fixed on the senators arriving for the hearing. She was, to them, a minor player in the day's drama, a House member making a token appearance. They were focused on Senator Graham, who arrived with his customary entourage, smiling and making a quick joke to a familiar journalist before sweeping. Into the committee room, the room itself was a theater of power. The vast, tiered dais curved around the witness table, each senator's place marked with a nameplate. Banks of cameras were positioned to capture every angle. Staffers bustled, placing glasses of water and thick binders. At the center of it, all at the highest point of the dais, was the chairman's seat. Crockett took her place at the long, polished witness table. To her right sat two other witnesses, a law professor and a representative from a judicial watchdog group, both scheduled to speak on the official topic of the day. To her left was the empty chair for Judge Alistair Finch, the nominee, who would appear for the second panel. She arranged her notes, the laminated pages tucked neatly underneath. She could feel the slight tremor of adrenaline in her hands and consciously stilled them, folding them on the table. She was a guest here, an outsider. The rules of this chamber were not her own, but the principles of justice, she believed, were universal. Graham entered, and the room fell silent. He brought the hearing to order with a sharp rap of his wooden gavel. "This hearing of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary will come to order," he announced, his voice resonating with authority. He went through the opening formalities, welcoming his colleagues and acknowledging the nominee, who was seated in the front row of the audience. Then he turned his attention to the first panel of witnesses. "We have with us today a distinguished Panel 2 discuss an issue of great importance, the current backlog in our federal civil courts and its impact on American citizens and businesses. We will hear from Professor Abernathy, Mr. Childs, and we are pleased to welcome a guest from the House of Representatives, the Honorable Jasmine Crockett from the 30th District of Texas. Representative Crockett, the floor is yours for 5 minutes." Crockett adjusted the microphone. "Thank you, Chairman Graham, Ranking Member Durbin, and distinguished members of this committee." She began her prepared remarks, her voice even and professional. She spoke about the courts in her district, about the long delays citizens faced waiting for their day in court, about how justice delayed is truly justice denied. She used the precise academic language expected in such a setting, citing statistics and case backlogs. The senators listened, some nodding, others checking their phones. She was playing her part, fulfilling the courtesy that had been extended. Graham leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed. This was exactly what he had expected. She used her allotted 4.5 minutes on the official topic. Then, as she saw the yellow light on the timing system blink, signaling she had 30 seconds left, she made her move. "But the greatest delay of justice, Mr. Chairman," she began, her tone shifting, sharpening, drawing the wandering attention of the senators back to her, "is not a backlog in a courthouse. It is a law that prevents a citizen from ever reaching the courthouse door in the first place." Graham's posture changed. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "This was not in the prepared testimony. I speak of a system, Crockett," continued her voice rising in volume and conviction, "where the law itself is weaponized against the very people we are sworn to protect. I speak of a system where a single mother, a teacher from my district in Dallas, Texas, can be in a car accident in your state of South Carolina, receive life-saving care, and then be rewarded with a crippling bill and a legal notice that her family's only assets being targeted for foreclosure." A murmur went through the room. The press corps, moments before listless, suddenly came alive. Cameras swiveled to focus tightly on Crockett, then on Graham, whose face was hardening into a mask of controlled fury. "Mr. Chairman, I speak of a system that your bill, the Protect and Stabilize Patient Solvency Act, created. A system that tells my constituent, Maria Sanchez, that she has no legal recourse in her home state, that she must enter a binding arbitration process hundreds of miles away, run by the very corporate entity that is threatening to make her and her son homeless." "Representative Crockett," Graham interjected, his voice cold and laced with warning, "your time has expired, and your testimony is straying from the subject of this hearing." Crockett met his gaze directly. She did not flinch. She had anticipated this exact moment. This was the procedural wall she had to break through. "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, my testimony is about the absolute denial of justice, which I believe is the most severe backlog of all." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out the first laminated sheet, holding it up for the cameras to see. It was a copy of the hospital bill. The figure at the bottom, $317,422.14, stark and obscene. "This is Maria Sanchez's bill," Crockett declared. "Representative?" Graham's voice was sharp now, angry. He picked up his gavel. "You are out of order. This is not the proper venue for this discussion. Your line of testimony is not germane to the subject of judicial nominees or court backlogs." He banged the gavel once. "Not germane." The phrase hung in the air, a procedural death sentence. It was the tool chairman used to silence dissent, to control the narrative, to kill an uncomfortable line of questioning. Any other witness would have stopped, apologized, and sat down. Jasmine Crockett did not sit down. Instead, she calmly placed the hospital bill on the table and pulled out the second laminated sheet, the legal notice of the lien. Against Maria's home, she held it up higher this time. The cameras zoomed in. She ignored the gavel. She ignored the rising chaos and the furious whispers from the dais. She spoke directly to Lindsey Graham, her voice cutting through the noise with the clarity of a ringing bell. "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman," she said, her words measured and powerful, "when the law you championed allows a hospital that funds your campaign to make a mother homeless, it is extremely germane to the character of the justice system you oversee." The room erupted. Graham's face, now flushed a deep red, was a portrait of incandescent rage. He hammered the gavel repeatedly, the loud cracks echoing in the ornate chamber. "This hearing is in recess." "Recess," he yelled, his voice hoarse. Senators from his party were shouting, calling for her microphone to be cut. Democratic senators were sitting in stunned silence, a few with faint. The connection had been made, not with a subtle insinuation, but with a direct, unassailable public accusation. She had brought the receipt, as she had promised her staff, and laid it at the feet of the United States Senate. The nominee, Judge Alistair Finch, sat forgotten in the front row, his confirmation hearing completely and utterly derailed. The cameras were no longer on him. They were on the woman who had just hijacked a Senate hearing and, in doing so, had started a war. The war was just beginning. The sound of the gavel was like a gunshot in the cavernous room, a desperate attempt to impose order on a narrative that had just been violently wrestled from the chairman's control. Lindsey Graham's face was a thundercloud of crimson and white. He was no longer the affable, powerful chairman. He was a man ambushed on his own ground, and his fury was palpable. "Recess," he yelled again, his voice cracking under the strain. But Jasmine Crockett did not move. She remained standing at the witness table, a solitary figure in the eye of the storm she had created. The laminated legal notice was still in her hand, but she had lowered it slightly. Her point had been made. Now she would hold the space. Her stillness was, in itself, an act of defiance. It communicated that she was not done, that this was not a theatrical outburst she would retreat from in embarrassment. She was waiting. Around the dais, the senators reacted. On the Republican side, Senator Mike Lee of Utah, a constitutional purist, looked less angry than intellectually offended by the sheer procedural chaos. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas leaned forward, a predator's smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the spectacle of his senior colleague's public humiliation. Even at the hands of a Texas Democrat, he remained silent, content to watch the fire burn. Cotton's voice was a sharp bark. "Is it the tradition of this esteemed body to allow a guest from the lower chamber to come into our hearings and levy baseless, slanderous accusations for a cheap social media clip? This is an abuse of privilege. It's a disgrace." Graham, grasping for a lifeline, pointed a trembling finger at Cotton. "The senator from Arkansas is correct. This is an unprecedented abuse of," but Crockett cut him off, not by shouting, but by speaking into the still-live microphone, her voice a paradigm of composed reason. "I object to the characterization from the senator from Arkansas. I have presented no baseless accusation." She looked directly at Cotton, then let her Gaze sweep across the dais. I have presented a sequence of documented facts. Fact 1. The Protect and Stabilize Patient Solvency Act was signed into law. Fact 2. The Palmetto Health Group, a major donor to the chairman, is a primary beneficiary of that law. Fact 3. That same corporation is now using that law to pursue a foreclosure action against my constituent, a U.S. citizen, outside of her home state's jurisdiction. If the senator from Arkansas finds facts to be slanderous, then I'd suggest his argument is with reality, not with me. She had not only refused to be silenced, but she had also taken a procedural objection and turned it back on her accuser with the precision of a trial lawyer. The press corps was in a frenzy. Reporters who had been half dozing were now standing, craning their necks, shouting questions that were lost in the general din. Congresswoman, will you release the documents? Chairman Graham, will you respond to the donor allegation? The Democratic side of the committee was a study in controlled shock. Ranking Member Dick Durbin, a man who revered the Senate's traditions and decorum, looked deeply conflicted. He did not approve of the methods, but the substance of the charge, corporate influence shaping legislation with devastating human consequences, was the very thing Democrats campaigned against. He caught Crockett's eye, and she gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of respect that also conveyed, "I know what I'm doing." Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, who had made a career out of exposing dark money and corporate influence in politics. He looked like a man. Watching his favorite student hit a grand slam, Graham saw he was losing the room and the narrative entirely. It was simply allowing the chaos to fester on live television. He had to regain control. "We will have order," he bellowed, banging the gavel again and again until the sharp cracks finally silenced some of the noise. A staffer, looking terrified, scurried to comply. But Crockett had already finished. She placed the lien notice neatly on top of the hospital bill, aligning their edges with perfect precision. She slid them back into her leather portfolio. She snapped the portfolio shut. The click was a sound of finality then. She turned and began to walk away from the table. It was not a retreat, it was an exit. She walked with the same deliberate pace she had entered with. The swarm of reporters surged towards her, a wall of bodies, microphones, and cameras. "Congresswoman, what do you want the chairman to do?" shouted a reporter from the AP. "Why bring this up in a confirmation hearing?" yelled someone from CNN. Crockett paused for a single moment, surrounded by the clamor. She didn't look at any single reporter, but spoke to all of them. "I came here today to speak about justice," she said, her voice clear and carrying over the noise. "The documents I presented speak for themselves. You should ask Chairman Graham why his legislation is resulting in his donors foreclosing on the homes of American citizens. He's the one with the gavel. He should have the answers." And with that, she turned and continued her path. The sea of journalists partying before her as she walked out of the committee room, leaving behind a scene of political carnage. Back on the dais, Graham was seething. Crockett's parting shot had been devastatingly effective, turning the press corps' attention squarely back onto him. He was trapped. He looked at the empty witness chair, then at the frantic faces of his staff. He had to salvage the day. He had to get Finch's confirmation back on track. "The committee will reconvene," he announced, his voice strained. "The recess is over. We will now proceed with the hearing. Mr. Chairman," it was Dick Durbin's voice, calm and grave. "The gentlelady from Texas has concluded her testimony, Senator Durbin. We have other witnesses and a nominee to consider." "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman," Durbin continued, "an allegation of a direct link between campaign donations, legislation you authored, and grievous financial harm to an American citizen has been aired in this committee. To ignore it and proceed as if nothing has happened would be a disservice to this body and to the American people's trust in it." Graham felt the walls closing in. Durbin was using the Senate's own rules of propriety against him. The charge wasn't just coming from a disruptive House member anymore. It was being legitimized by the Senate's own leadership. "This is political theater," Graham shot back, his voice rising again. "She ambushed this hearing to block a good man from the bench. That's all this is. Are you going to be a party to that, Senator?" "I am a party to the integrity of this committee," Durbin replied, evenly, "and that integrity is now in question. I believe it is highly inappropriate to move forward with the consideration of a lifetime. judicial appointment until the serious matters raised by Representative Crockett have been addressed by the chairman. Therefore, I am formally requesting we adjourn for the day." A chorus of "I second" that came from the Democratic side. Graham was cornered. If he forced a vote on adjourning, he might win on party lines, but it would look terrible. It would look like he was running from the accusation, using his majority power to silence inquiry. The story would no longer be just about Crockett's outburst. It would be about the Judiciary Chairman refusing to address a charge of corruption. He looked to his Republican colleagues for support, but saw only discomfort. Continuing now would only dignify Crockett's claims further and keep the cameras. Rolling on his public flogging, his face was pale. The fury had been replaced by a cold, hard realization of his defeat. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly humiliated. He gripped the gavel, his knuckles white. "This hearing has been compromised by a calculated political stunt," he said. "A stunt designed to smear this committee and to obstruct our constitutional duty. But since the minority party apparently wishes to abdicate its responsibilities for the day, so be it." He looked up, no longer at his colleagues, but at the cameras, at the audience beyond. "This committee is adjourned." He slammed the gavel down one last time, the sound sharp and final. He stood up abruptly, gathering his papers with jerky, angry movements, and stalked out of the room through a side door, refusing to make eye contact with the press, his staff, or the now truly forgotten nominee. Judge Alistair Finch, who sat alone in the front row, his lifetime ambition collateral damage in a fight he had no part in. The hearing was over. Jasmine Crockett was gone, but her accusation remained, hanging in the air of the great committee room, a toxic cloud that now enveloped the chairman himself. The double doors of the Hart Senate office building swung open, and for a moment Jasmine Crockett was hit, not by sound, but by light. A blinding barrage of camera flashes strobed against her face, turning the midday sun into a flickering, disorienting glare. The low murmur of the hallway had been replaced by the roar of a full-blown press gaggle, a chaotic scrum of journalists, who had scrambled from the hearing room to intercept her on the street. "Congresswoman! Congresswoman!" The questions came as a single, unintelligible shout. Microphones, smartphones, and recorders were thrust towards her face like weapons. Her new communications director, Alina, materialized at her side, putting a firm hand on her elbow to guide her. "Clear a path. Official business," Alina commanded, her voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. They began the slow, fraught journey down the few steps to the curb where a black government sedan was waiting, its engine running. "Did you plan to derail the hearing from the start?" a reporter from Politico yelled, shoving a recorder past Alina's shoulder. "Do you have a personal vendetta against Senator Graham?" Another shouted. Crockett kept her eyes forward, her expression unreadable, a mask of professional composure, but she stopped for one beat, a calculated pause that drew the entire scrum into a moment of silence. "The facts I presented today are public record," she said, her voice devoid of the fiery passion from the hearing room, replaced now by a cold, factual steel. "The legislation is public record. The campaign donations are public record. The foreclosure notice is public record. The only question you should be asking is why it took a guest from the House of Representatives to bring them up in a Senate Judiciary hearing." The statement, delivered without emotion, was more damning than any angry tirade. It was an indictment of the entire process. Before they could erupt with follow-ups, Alina had the car door open. Crockett slid in, and the door slammed shut, muffling the roar. To a dull thud the instant the door closed, the mask dissolved. Jasmine Crockett leaned her head back against the seat and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 48 hours. Her hands, which had been so steady at the witness table, were now trembling in her lap. The adrenaline that had sharpened her mind and fueled her voice was beginning to recede, leaving the first tremors of a massive psychic and physical exhaustion in its wake. Her phone, which she'd put on silent, was lit up like a Christmas tree, vibrating nonstop. Against the leather of the seat, Alina had her own phone pressed to her ear, her face a strange combination of terror and pure, unadulterated glee. "Yes, Jake, I hear you," Alina said into her phone, presumably to a producer at CNN. "No, she's not doing a live hit from the car." Yes, we will send the full documentation to your booking producer. Hold on, she covered the mouthpiece. MSNBC wants you for All In tonight. Fox just ran a Chiron calling you the saboteur of the Senate. Congratulations. You've officially pissed off everyone who matters. Crockett closed her eyes. Just get us back to the office, Alina. The office in the Longworth building was a hive of controlled chaos. Every phone was ringing. David, the young legislative aide who had first found Maria's case, was sitting at his desk, his face pale, staring at the screen of his computer. He was supposed to be logging constituent calls, but he was instead scrolling through the social media inferno. The clip of her confrontation was the single most viewed video in the world. It was being cut, remixed, and memed in real time. A progressive advocacy group had already slapped text over it. This is what fighting back looks like, and their post had 1 million likes. A conservative blog had posted a still of Graham's furious, gavel-banging face with the caption, "The new face of the Republican Party bullied into silence." The hashtag #Jermaine was trending, a bizarre, wonky word suddenly on the lips of millions. Half the posts were from people praising her courage. The other half were filled with a vitriol so vile it seemed to crawl off the screen. In the middle of the digital storm, something else was happening. David clicked on another link, this one to a GoFundMe page. The title was, "Help Maria Sanchez Save Her Home." It hadn't been started by their office or any political group. The creator was a woman named Sarah Beth Miller, an oncology nurse from Cleveland, Ohio. The description was simple. "I just saw what's happening to this teacher from Texas on the news. I'm a nurse. I see what medical bills do to families. This isn't about politics. It's about decency. Let's help her. I'm starting with $50. The page had been live for less than 2 hours. It had already raised over $75,000. The donations were pouring in, small amounts from all over the country. $5 from a student in California, $10 from a truck driver in Pennsylvania, $20 from a retiree in Florida. The comments section was a testament to a shared, simmering anger. "We are all Maria Sanchez. My dad lost his farm over a hospital bill. This is for him. Thank you, Representative Crockett, for finally saying the quiet part out loud." Crockett looked over David's shoulder, reading the comments. For the first time since leaving the hearing room, a genuine, unforced smile touched her lips. "Look at that, David," she said softly. "Look what's happening." This was the point. This was the signal, breaking through the noise, but the noise was growing louder. Alina came into the office and closed the door. "The cable news debate is in full swing," she announced, pulling up feeds on her tablet. On one screen, an MSNBC host was leaning into the camera, her voice filled with admiration. Jasmine Crockett today did more than just testify. She channeled the righteous anger of millions of Americans who feel crushed by a system that is rigged for the wealthy and the well-connected. She may have broken a rule of decorum, but she spoke a fundamental truth. Alina swiped to another channel on Fox News. The mood was apocalyptic. A host with a severe expression was staring down the camera. Let's be very clear about what happened today. This was not an act of bravery. This was a premeditated political assassination, a disgraceful stunt that disrespects the very institutions our republic is built upon. This is the result of a radical ideology that seeks to burn down our traditions, not to solve problems. Representative Crockett should be formally censured for her behavior. She swiped again to a chaotic split-screen panel on CNN. A Republican strategist was shouting about procedure while a Democratic analyst was yelling about justice, but the moderator held up her hand. Hold on. Let's put the theatrics aside for a moment. The core question here isn't about her tone, it's about her facts. Congresswoman Crockett alleged a direct link between a campaign donation, a piece of legislation, and a specific negative outcome for her constituent. Senator Graham's office has released a statement calling her actions a new low, but they have yet to deny the central claim. That's the real story we need to be tracking. The narrative was shifting. The initial shock at the breach of decorum was giving way to a more dangerous question for Lindsey Graham. Was it true? The day bled into a long, dark night. Alina and David eventually went home, their faces etched with the fatigue of a political battle that had gone from 0 to 100 in a single afternoon. Crockett remained in her office. The silence of the now empty Longworth hallways a stark contrast to the unending digital scream of her phone and computer. She finally muted everything. The exhaustion that had been lurking at the edges all day crashed over her in a tidal wave. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, making her bones ache. The high of the confrontation was gone, replaced by the low thrum of anxiety. It wasn't regret. She knew with absolute certainty that she would do it again, but she was now acutely aware of the cost. She had kicked the hornet's nest, and the swarm was coming for her. David had left a printout on her desk before he left. It was the first page of the threat log he had been forced to start for the Capitol Police. The subject lines of the emails were filled with racist and misogynistic slurs. The messages themselves, which he had thankfully redacted, were detailed fantasies of violence. They knew her office number. They knew her name. They knew what she looked like. She pushed the paper away, a cold sickness churning in her stomach. She picked up her personal cell phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang twice before her older sister Maya, a high school principal in Houston, picked up. Jasmine Felicia Crockett, Maya's voice came through the phone, a mixture of awe and exasperation. "You have lost your ever-loving mind." Jasmine let out a tired laugh. "Is that how we're starting this conversation? I've got Mom here with me. We saw you on the news. We were screaming at the TV. I swear I thought Mom was going to have a heart attack from pride. She's telling everyone at her church that her daughter stood up to that man in Washington." Jasmine smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Tell Mama I love her." "I will, but Jas." Maya's tone shifted. The pride was replaced by a deep, familiar worry. "Then I made the mistake of going online. The things they're saying about you, the names they're calling you, the pictures they're posting. It's disgusting. It scares me to death." There was a pause. "Is it worth it, honey? Putting yourself through all this for them? To treat you like this?" It was the question she had been subconsciously asking herself for hours. It was the question every person in a public-facing battle has to answer, over and over again. She looked down at the GoFundMe page, still open on her computer screen, at the name Maria Sanchez, at the running tally of donations from strangers. "Maya," she said, her voice quiet but firm, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by that core of conviction that had driven her all day. They were going to take her house, a teacher, a single mom. They passed a law that let them do it, and the man who wrote the law took their money. What was I supposed to do? What would you have me do? Sit there quietly and talk about judicial backlogs while they put a family out on the street? She took a deep breath. This is the job, the whole job. It's not just the handshaking and the ribbon cuttings, it's this. Standing in the path when you see a boulder rolling downhill towards someone who can't get out of the way, even if you get scraped up doing it, especially then. Her sister was silent for a long moment. "You stand there and you call me tomorrow." "Will," Jasmine promised. "I love you. I love you too." It looked peaceful from her window, a beacon of democracy and order, but she knew that inside that dome and in the offices surrounding it, battle lines were being drawn. She had won the day's engagement, but the political cost was still being calculated. The threats were real. The exhaustion was real. And tomorrow, she would have to wake up and fight all over again. The 2 days following the hearing were a political lifetime. The storm Jasmine Crockett had unleashed did not abate, forcing everyone to choose a side. Lindsey Graham, a veteran of countless political brawls, fell back on a familiar strategy: attack, deflect, and rally the base. He was defiant, his anger now channeled into a performance of aggrieved patriotism. "This wasn't about some woman in Texas," Sean Graham said, leaning into the camera. "Let's be clear. This was a coordinated ambush. A radical anarchist, dressed up in a congresswoman's suit, decided to burn down the traditions of the United States Senate to stop the confirmation of a good and decent man. Judge Harlan down everything that makes this country great. She has no respect for the rules, no respect for the body, no respect for the truth." But Senator Hannity interjected, playing his part. "The Palmetto Health Group is a pillar of the South Carolina community. They employ thousands of people. The bill I wrote helps protect them from frivolous job-killing lawsuits so they can continue to provide world-class care. To try and twist that into some kind of corrupt bargain is a new low, even for them," he never denied the donation. For his base, it worked. For everyone else, the refusal to give a straight answer was becoming conspicuous. Crockett, meanwhile, went quiet. Her office issued a single statement confirming the accuracy of the documents she presented, and then fell silent. She turned down invitations from Rachel Maddow, Anderson Cooper, and every major network. Her silence was a strategy. The media vacuum she created was filled by the sound of Graham's increasingly defensive protests, making him the sole focus of the story, while the Democratic leadership in the House kept a cautious public distance. Moment arrived on a Friday afternoon, and it came from the most unexpected of sources. Senator Thaddeus Stone of Utah was a relic from a different era, conservative who spoke in quiet, measured tones and revered the institution's history and rules above all else. He was known to despise political theatrics. It wasn't Crockett's outburst that bothered him most. To Stone, using a procedural rule like germaneness to shut down an inquiry into the real-world effects of a federal law was a perversion of the rule's intent, and that, in his view, was far more damaging to the Senate than a loud argument. He did not call a press conference. He did not go on a Sunday show. He had his office email a 2-paragraph statement to the Capitol Hill press pool. It landed in newsroom inboxes at 2:15 p.m., and within minutes, the entire political landscape had shifted. The statement read, "The traditions and decorum of the United States Senate are paramount to its function as the world's greatest deliberative body. They are the framework upon which civil discourse is built. Legislation can never be considered not germane." While I do not condone the manner of the inquiry presented in the Judiciary Committee this week, the underlying questions raised by the representative from Texas regarding the intersection of legislation, campaign finance, and constituent harm are substantive. They deserve a substantive and direct response from the chairman. The Senate owes the American public that much. The effect was seismic. Gentlemen, by acknowledging the substance of Crockett's claim, it was no longer a partisan stunt by a radical anarchist. He had given every journalist, pundit, and moderate Republican official license to ask the question that Graham had been desperately avoiding. Lindsey Graham read the statement on a printout from a wire service. He read it once, then a second time. He was no longer just being attacked by the left. He had been publicly rebuked, by his own side, by a man whose integrity was beyond question. He was politically stranded. Senator CNN is asking for a comment on Senator Stone's statement. Get out, Graham roared. That afternoon, the Palmetto Health Group, now facing a national firestorm and intense pressure from its board, released a panicked, poorly worded statement. It said they acted in full compliance with all applicable state and federal laws, including the PSPSA, and that they were proud of the economic contributions they make to the state of South Carolina. The statement, which read like it was written by a team of terrified lawyers, failed to mention Maria Sanchez by name and came across as breathtakingly callous. And the hospital's response in her office, and arrange a press conference for tomorrow morning. Not at the airport, at the MLK Junior Community Center in South Dallas. The choice of venue was deliberate. Her team reached out to Maria Sanchez. If she would be willing to attend the press conference, Crockett spoke to her personally. "You do not have to say a word, Maria," she said. "But if you are willing to just be there, your presence will speak louder than any of us." Maria, who had been watching the events unfold with a mixture of terror and dawning hope, agreed. The next morning, the community center was packed. The cars of local Dallas residents who had come to show their support. The room was hot and crowded. Jasmine Crockett walked to the podium. To her left, standing quietly with her hands clasped in front of her, was Maria Sanchez. Maria looked nervous but resolute. Her presence immediately silenced the room, transforming the abstract political debate into a human reality. Crockett began, her voice calm and measured. "Good morning. I'm not in Washington today because this isn't about Washington. This is about Dallas. It's about home. Community?" She paused, letting the words sink in. "There's been a lot of talk this week about rules, about decorum, about what is and what is not germane. So I want to be very clear. This was never about breaking the rules. This was about exposing a system where the rules are broken from the start. A system where the laws are written to protect the powerful and the doors of justice are slammed shut on everyone else." I want to thank Senator Thaddeus Stone for his principled statement. He reminded us that our procedures are meant to find the truth, not hide from it. And the truth is simple. She turned slightly and gestured towards Maria. The truth is that Maria Sanchez, a teacher, a mother, and my constituent, did everything right. She had insurance. She tried to pay her bills. And in return for that, a law passed in Washington, D.C. was used by a company from another state to try and take her home. That's the truth. Her voice began to build, filled with the passion she had suppressed for days. They say I was disrespectful. But I ask you, what is more disrespectful? Raising your voice in a Senate hearing, or writing a law that allows a hospital to foreclose on a teacher's house? What is a greater breach of decorum? Interrupting a politician, or interrupting a family's entire life? The question for every single person in elected office is simple. Who do you work for? Your campaigns? Or do you work for the people who trust you with their vote? I can't answer for the senator from South Carolina, but I can answer for me. I work for Maria Sanchez. I work for every family in the 30th District of Texas who is one medical bill, one accident, one emergency away from financial ruin. She leaned into the microphone for her final words, her gaze sweeping across the cameras to the national audience beyond. So yes, I raised my voice. And I will continue to raise my voice for anyone in my community who is being silenced, ignored, or crushed by a system that is not designed for them, because justice is not a footnote. A person's home, their security, their future, that is the most germane topic there is, and fighting for it is the only reason to be in this job. Thank you. She stepped back from the podium. The room was silent for a beat, and then it erupted in applause, not just from the supporters, but spontaneously from some of the seasoned, cynical journalists in the room. Her speech had been a masterstroke. She hadn't been angry or vengeful. She had been principled. She had elevated the fight from a personal spat to a moral crusade, framing it in terms that every American could understand. The narrative was now hers, completely and irrevocably. She had weathered the storm, waited for her moment, and delivered the final defining word. The shockwave from Jasmine Crockett's Dallas press conference radiated back to Washington, landed squarely on the doorstep of the Palmetto Health Group. The story was no longer about a breach of Senate decorum. It was now a simple, devastating morality play about a giant corporation and a single mother. The GoFundMe for Maria Sanchez had skyrocketed past its initial goal, cresting at over $500,000, enough to pay her bill twice over, a resounding public referendum on the hospital's actions. Enraged citizens organized on Facebook began picketing Palmetto health facilities across South Carolina. The corporation's stock price, which had been stable for years, took a sudden sharp dip as investors grew nervous about the brand's toxicity. The PR nightmare was now a financial crisis. Less than a week after Crockett's speech, the capitulation came. It was swift and total. The CEO of the Palmetto Health Group, a man who had previously refused all comment, appeared in a hastily arranged press conference. He looked pale and deeply uncomfortable. He announced that after a thorough and compassionate review of Maria Sanchez's case, the corporation was dropping the lien on her home, forgiving her entire medical debt in full, and issuing a formal apology to her and her family. Furthermore, they were suspending all out-of-state collections under the PSPSA, pending a full internal policy review. It was a complete surrender. That evening, Jasmine Crockett sat in her quiet apartment in Washington, D.C., and made a call. "Hello!" Maria Sanchez's voice was different. The tremor was gone. "Maria, it's Jasmine Crockett." There was a moment of silence, then a soft sob. "Congresswoman, I saw the news. I still can't believe it. They're leaving me alone." "They are, Maria. It's over." "I don't know how to thank you," Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. "All that money people sent. I'm going to use it to set up a fund at my school for kids whose families have medical emergencies. To pay it forward, you didn't just save my house, Congresswoman. You gave me my life back. You gave me a purpose." Crockett felt a profound sense of relief, a quiet joy that was a world away from the noise of the political victory. The win that mattered. "You did that, Maria. Your courage in letting me tell your story made all of this happen. You get to go back to being a teacher and a mom now." While Maria's personal battle was won, the legislative war was quietly entering a new phase. Senator Thaddeus Stone was a man of his word. He believed the Senate had a duty to correct its own mistakes. He arranged a private meeting in his office with Senator Durbin and a handful of other serious-minded senators from both parties. Lindsey Graham was not invited. "The PSPSA has a fatal flaw," Stone began, speaking to the small group. "It creates a perverse incentive for predatory behavior across state lines, and it strips citizens of due process in their home jurisdictions. Representative Crockett, whatever you think of her methods, exposed that flaw brilliantly. Let it stand." They knew a full repeal of Graham's bill was impossible, but they could patch the hole. They drafted a simple, one-page amendment. In the halls of Congress, it quickly became known as the Sanchez Amendment. It had two key provisions. First, any arbitration or legal proceeding arising from the PSPSA must occur in the patient's home state, not the provider's. Second, it explicitly stated that no provision in the Act could be used to supersede state-level consumer protection laws, particularly those related to homestead. Exemptions. The amendment was attached to a must-pass annual funding bill for the Department of Health and Human Services. It was a brilliant legislative maneuver. To block it, Graham would have to risk shutting down the government's health agencies, all to protect a provision that had made him a national pariah. He was outflanked. Markup session a week later, the amendment passed with bipartisan support. Graham was present, but he was silent, his face a stony mask of defeat. His signature law had been gutted, not with a bang, but with the quiet stroke of a pen. The news cycle, as it always does, moved on. There was a new crisis, a new scandal, a new outrage. The story of Maria Sanchez became a half-remembered event from a few weeks ago. The political world, it seemed, had forgotten. But the echo of an action does not travel at the speed of news. It travels at the speed of a human heart. 1 month after the tumultuous hearing, in the hushed, cavernous reading room of the University of Michigan Law Library, a 23-year-old student named Leo Valdez was supposed to be studying for his final exam in corporate law. Instead, he was staring at his phone, a deep, familiar cynicism washing over him. He'd come to law school 3 years ago with a fire in his belly, a naive dream of fighting for the little guy, born from watching his own family struggle against a landlord who wielded eviction notices like a weapon. But 3 years of Socratic grilling, crushing debt, and the overwhelming pressure to secure a 6-figure salary at a corporate firm had extinguished that fire, leaving only cold ash. System, he had concluded, was a game, and the only way to win was to serve the powerful. Justice was an abstraction you talked about in class, not something you practiced in the real world. Procrastinating. He scrolled through a non-political forum on Reddit, a place for interesting videos and uplifting stories. It was a grainy video clip titled simply, "A Lawyer Using Her Powers for Good." He tapped on it. The clip was from the Senate Judiciary hearing. He watched as a black woman in a sharp blue suit calmly, deliberately dismantled a United States senator. He saw her hold up the papers. He heard the chairman bang his gavel, shouting that her words were not germane. And then he heard her voice cut through the noise, clear and steady. "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, when the law you championed allows a hospital that funds your campaign to make a mother homeless, it is extremely germane to the character of the justice system you oversee." Leo froze, again and again. He had heard about the incident when it happened, but had dismissed it as more political theater. But seeing it now, stripped of the cable news commentary, it hit him differently. He wasn't seeing a politician. He was seeing a lawyer. He recognized the cadence of her argument, the strategic use of evidence, the way she turned her opponent's own procedural rules against him. It was a masterful piece of advocacy. It was the kind of lawyering he had dreamed of doing before the cynicism set in. He saw the direct, unbroken line between a lawyer's skill and a just outcome for a single human being. He closed the Reddit app. He opened his university email client and searched for a message he had ignored for weeks. The subject line was, "Volunteers Needed, University Pro Bono Eviction Defense Clinic." For 3 years, he had told himself he was too busy, that he needed to focus on his grades to get a good job. He looked at the video of Jasmine Crockett one last time. He thought of his own family all those years ago. He thought of Maria Sanchez. He clicked reply on the email, over the keyboard for a second, and then he typed, "I'd like to volunteer. When can I start?" He hit send. The headlines about the showdown in Washington had long since vanished. The pundits had moved on. But the true victory, the lasting echo of that one moment of courage, had just landed in a law library in Ann Arbor, Michigan. A law, it had reminded a young man why he wanted to practice law in the first place. And in a quiet corner of the library, under the soft glow of a reading lamp, a fire that had long gone cold was starting to burn again. Was Jasmine Crockett's breach of decorum a necessary act of advocacy? Or does breaking the rules, even for a just cause, ultimately damage the institutions we rely on? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that go beyond the headlines.